Hey, what is up guys? Welcome back to another exciting episode on the channel. Hope you're doing well today. Now in today's video, we are going to try to do our best and discuss a somewhat more advanced topic inside of the world of iOS development. And so for today's topic, we are going to discuss how exactly we can transform our MVC projects into something that uses MVVM. Now, for those of you guys that aren't super familiar with what MVVM is, it basically stands for Model, View, and View Model. Now, what exactly is the idea behind all this, right? Well, whenever you can separate your model and views into a separate view model object, you can actually test your applications a lot easier. Now, it's kind of hard to actually talk about this and make sense of it all. So in today's video, we are going to go through a very simple application that I've set up on the left side over there. And so as you can kind of tell, this application doesn't do very much. It's actually just a very simple UI Tableview controller, and it's fetching some data from the internet using some JSON. And the important part of this application is that you'll notice that all of these rows here are a little bit different, right? Some of them contain the eye icon on the right side, and then some of them do not. The bottom text in the detail label actually contains a little bit more text on these top two rows as well. So I already have this entire project built out using the MVC framework architecture. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at how we can transform that and introduce some view model classes inside of our project. And then finally, at the very end, I'm also going to show you how you can actually introduce some unit testing inside of your project as well. And that way we can actually see the advantages of these view model classes. All right, so this video is going to be maybe a little bit more advanced, so hopefully you can make it all the way to the end. Let's go ahead and get started with Xcode right now. Alrighty guys, welcome to Xcode, and I hope you're ready to start diving into the code right away here. The first thing I would like to do is to simply walk you through some of the files that we have set up for our project over here. And let's see, we have a model group, a view group, as well as a controller group. And the easiest way to walk through this is to probably look at the CourseModel Object first. And so some of the properties that we have on here is, let's see, ID, name, and number of lessons. You can already see some of this data being presented inside of the cell objects over here on the right side. So for example, the bolded text is just the course name. The number of lessons is actually 32 and 19 over here for these two bottom rows. And that looks pretty good, right? So nothing too fancy in here. And the next file we should probably move on to is the course cell file. Now the course cell is actually responsible for rendering out these white rows inside of our table view. And the way that we do that is basically we have a lot of styling that's being typed out inside of code. So for example, text label font, and also detail text label being black. That's kind of why it shows up like that. And let's kind of move up to the very top here, which is the more important piece of code that we should sort of focus on. And let's kind of see what happens whenever we set a course model object on our cell. And basically here's what happens. We set the text label text to the course.name. So that's kind of why you see the Instagram Firebase over there. And this bit of logic kind of checks the number of lessons being greater than 35. Okay, so this is just an arbitrary number. And whatever number of lessons on this model object, when it's greater than 35, we set this accessory type to detail disclosure button. And that enables this eye icon all the way on the right side over there. And so in addition to that, detail label.text gets turned into lessons 30 plus, and check it out. That's kind of why you see that over there on these top two rows. And all the way on the bottom right here, if the number of lessons is less than 35, we actually show lessons, and then we show course.number of lessons. That's why you see lessons 32 and 19 at the bottom. Okay, so that is pretty straightforward. And the reason why I'm showing you this is because a little bit later on, I am going to show you how we can move some of this model logic into a separate view model layer. Okay, so that's going to become a lot easier to understand a little bit later. And before we actually do that, why don't we go inside of Course's controller to see what is going on with our UI Tableview Controller subclass. So that's what it is. And let's see, first thing to look at is view did load. So what's going on in here is we are setting up the nav bar. So that allows us to customize it with this bluish color. And I believe we're also setting up this large text title on the nav bar. And we also set the title to be white color as well. The second thing we do is we set up the table view. That's kind of why we have white for our cells and also this dark blue color at the bottom. This function sets it up so that it gets customized to look like this style. All right, so that's not all that important. And the next function that is something that we should indeed look at is called fetch data. So what exactly is this function doing is the question of the day here. And basically we are fetching courses from this service layer all the way over here. And this is a pretty straightforward function if you're familiar with completion blocks. And basically we fetch our courses, we get an error back and we simply make a check there. But on success, what happens is on line 31, we set self.courses, which is this array of model objects all the way on the top. We set that equal to the incoming courses from the completion block. And then finally, we just reload the entire table view with the courses that we get back. All right, so that's pretty good. And that's typically how you would set up your MVC project. Hopefully you guys are more than familiar with this type of setup. So with all of this stuff kind of explained like that, we are pretty much ready to move on to introducing our view model layer. And I am going to do that by, let's see, first creating a group over here. So this group is obviously going to be called a view model. Hopefully that is obvious. And now the first thing we need to do is to introduce our view model file. So let's just double click on that. And what exactly is this? Well, I'm going to call it CourseViewModel and just hit enter. And let's see what exactly is going to reside inside of the CourseViewModel file. Well, the CourseViewModel is going to be responsible for rendering out each of these views inside of the cells here. So the way I'm going to actually type it out is to use a struct for this CourseViewModel like that. And this guy is going to be very, very simple. It's just going to keep track of the name for now from our course object. So what I mean is we are going to create this name string property, and we're going to actually introduce some dependency injection via the initializer. So let me just type it out first, and the initializer will take in a course object like so. And so this course is just simply this course model object. And for the name, let's call self.name equals course.name. Okay, so for those of you guys that aren't familiar, this is actually called, let's see, dependency, let me spell this correctly. Dependency injection, or I guess also known as DI for short. And so now that you have this view model class, what exactly do you do with it, right? Well, we are simply going to go back into our courses controller file over here, and we are going to modify this courses array of model objects so that instead of containing a raw course, we're going to modify it to actually contain course view model. All right, so now this is a new array of course view model objects. If you try to build, you're going to get a lot of type mismatches. So what I'm going to do to fix this very easily is I'm going to rename this guy because it no longer makes sense to have this guy called courses. So you can refactor and rename, and it'll show you all the places to rename this in. And it's actually modifying the service file, which I don't really want to, so you can uncheck that. And this guy we are going to call CourseViewModels with an S at the end, hit the enter. And so that looks pretty good. And now what we want to do is whenever we fetch the courses from the internet via the service file, we actually get the courses back. But as you can see, the courses variable up here is actually an array of course objects. So what I want to do is I want to transform this into an array of CourseViewModel objects instead. So that's actually pretty easy. Let me just show you the syntax here. So return, and let's see, CourseViewModel, use the initializer of course, and I'm going to use $0 like so. So the map function, what it does is it takes an array, or you call the map function on your array, and whatever you do inside of here is just going to return all of these objects inside of a different array. All right, so let me just try to type this out or cut that. And what I can do is I can paste it over here. And I believe this courses is an optional array. So what you have to do is you have to do this nil coalescing via this guy over here. And I think that's a optional, so that should hopefully work. Let me try to build this project. And this guy is no longer that, so let me just paste that in one more time and build. So this part of the code looks okay to me now. And again, we're just simply transforming the courses model objects array over here into an array of course view model objects instead. All right, so once you do that, what you have to do is you want to modify the DQ process of self or row add. So previously, all we were doing is we were setting the course object on our cell. That's kind of why for the course cell file, this code right here, that's how it was working. We were simply setting the course object on here. So instead of doing that, I'm just going to comment out all of that code, and I'm going to create a new property called CourseViewModel. And let's call this CourseViewModel. Use the forced unwrap, use did set. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply say text label.text equals CourseViewModel. And you'll notice that the only property that exists on this object is the name property, right? So this actually will simplify how you perform the setup of your course view. And you don't want to include all of this logic in here because it gets really hard to test a little bit later. So this is the reason why we use a CourseViewModel object. It's a lot easier to read as well. So the last thing you need to do is you want to go into Courses Controller, and for the dequeuing process, what you can do now is if you build, comment that out, you can say cell.CourseViewModel equals this object over here, which is really a CourseViewModel. So this guy is a CourseViewModel. Let me rename that to make a little bit more sense. So Command and Control E can actually get to that piece of that code if I can get to it again. So let's see, Command E, like that. Okay, CourseViewModel, just type that in. And let's remove this commented line of code, build, and finally we can run our project. And now with the new view model layer, what you'll get inside of each one of your rows is simply the name for the course objects. All right, so that is the first step in introducing this view model layer. And obviously this isn't perfect because all of the information that we had earlier is now no longer showing inside of our cells. So how exactly do we go about fixing that, right? So this bit of logic, what I'm going to do is I'm going to somehow move this into the view model object instead. So let me just copy that and I'll paste it down here somewhere. So I'm not going to use that code, but instead I'm just going to look at it for a reference. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create two additional properties on this view model. The first one is accessory type, and then the second one will probably be the detailed text label. So why don't I do the string one first? So I'm going to say let display, not display, but detail text string, whatever you want to call that guy. Let this guy be of type string as well. And down here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to perform the course number check inside of the initializer. So if greater than 35, we are going to say detail text string equals this string over here. So just paste that in there. And why don't we do the else case right now? And we can say detail text string equals this chunk of code here. So the bottom else case, and just paste that in there. Okay, so that's looking pretty good to me. We can go ahead and go back into our course cell, and now we can build our project, make sure that those properties are registered, and you can say detail text label equals course view model, and you can say detail text string. So hopefully that's pretty straightforward. The detail text string is just going to show up on the bottom there. And so you can see that now this course cell, this view object, is not really aware of the course model, which is a pretty good thing. And all it knows about is the course view model, which contains just these two properties, name and detail text string. All right. Now the final thing is to probably include the accessory type as well inside of the CourseViewModel class. So what I'm going to do now is to set the accessory type, but first I probably have to declare the accessory type above. So accessory type, let this guy be a UI table view cell. So you see that's not available, right? Well, I'm going to import the UI kit framework inside of my view model layer. And it's okay to import UI kit inside of a view class because it has to be kind of dealt with on the UI layer anyways. So that's kind of fine for me. UI table view cell accessory type equals, let's see what is down here. We are going to use the detail disclosure button. And then the else case, we're just going to say accessory type equals .none, which is what that is down below. So now that I have all that logic typed down, I can just remove the comments, go back to the course cell, and you can see what I'm going to do here is to use accessory type equals CourseViewModel dot, let's see, accessory type after I build is now available. So running this now, we are going to get the exact same display that we had at the beginning of our application. We have the accessory type as well as the text for the detail down at the bottom, depending on whatever the number of lessons is. Okay, so pretty good stuff. Now that we have our logic inside of CourseViewModel, I can just wipe that out. And now this class right here is much easier to sort of understand. The main goal of using MVVM is to make sure that your view classes are not aware of the model classes inside of your project. So for example, course cell should not really be aware of course. It should only be aware of CourseViewModel. Okay, so that's kind of the one rule to follow up to this point. Okay, so that's the basic introduction into the model view model architecture. And what I would like to do now is to kind of show you what the point of doing this is by introducing a unit test inside of my project. And the way that you want to do this is to click on this guy over here, and down at the bottom you want to introduce a new unit test target. So just click on that, and down here inside of test you have this guy called iOS unit testing bundle. Make sure to click that instead of the UI testing. Double click on that, call this guy whatever you want, and just hit the finish over here, and that'll help you create this folder, which will then contain your test suite that's called this. So inside of here we have the setup function, we have teardown, and we have two test cases that are kind of written for us. What you want to do to run this is to either hit on this guy on the left side. So let me just click on that. It's going to run this test for us, and let's just make sure it passes. All right, so everything looks good, and I don't see my console down there, so I would like to hit the view, is it navigate? Let's see, view, assistant editor, debug area, activate console, bring this guy up. You actually get a lot of useful information inside of the console in regards to how your tests ran. So 0 failures, everything passed successfully. Okay, so that's pretty good. The other option to run your test is to go up to product, and you can't see the top of my menu, but inside of product, we have Command U, and typically I just hit Command U to run all of my tests. So that's going to run this bottom test as well, and you kind of see it shows up with this green check mark, right? So that's how you set up a unit test target. And what I would like to do is to write a special unit test case just to make sure that we can test our course model object and our course view model object. All right, so some of you guys are probably not really used to writing unit tests, so this stuff might be a little bit foreign, or it might be a little bit new to you. So once you see the code, it actually becomes pretty straightforward and easy to understand. The first thing you need to write is a function, and you want to make sure you call it test something, so test X or whatever. And the name I will give it is test CourseViewModel, and let's just end it like that. If you have this test in front of your functions, it's going to actually use this as one of your test cases, okay? So it's actually very important to prefix it with a test. And so what you can do is you can say xc assert equal, and if you use 0 and 1 here, it's going to try to run this test. So I'm going to run it, and maybe you can take a guess as to what's going to happen. So it's going to run, and you will see that this test actually should have failed. So let's kind of see what's going on here, and I'm just going to click on that one more time. It's going to launch that, and there we go, we have our test failure. So sometimes this guy is not all that fully functional. You have to run it a couple of times to get the test to work. Now if you click on here, it says that the assertion actually failed and 0 does not equal to 1. Hopefully you guys can see why that is failing. It's pretty obvious, right? So the next thing I would like to do is to somehow test my CourseViewModel Object against my course. So instead of talking about this for too long, let me just create some of the code here with CourseViewModel equals CourseViewModel. So CourseViewModel, you'll notice that it doesn't show up, right? So the reason is because your test suite isn't actually accessing the correct files for your project. So what you have to do is to introduce testable, and I'm going to import MVC to MVVM demo. All right, so you got to make sure this is called either, I think it's this guy or whatever your target is over here really. Okay, so once you import that, you can start typing out some things here, and you'll notice that your classes inside of your project are actually available for you to use here. So once you do that, you want to start typing out the initializer for your CourseViewModel, and you have to take in some kind of course, right? So this is the dependency is what we call it. So let's create our first dependency up here with course and set it equal to the CourseModel object. And this guy has a initializer that comes to us automatically. So course is over here. All structs have an initializer that you get by default. So that's why you get this guy. The ID, it doesn't really matter. I'm just going to give it a value of 0 for the course name. Let's call this my course name. So the next thing is to actually initialize the number of lessons. So I'm going to give this value 10, and we're going to test these two properties here first. And so the way this is going to work is we're going to pump in the dependency with the course right there. And what exactly do we want to test now, right? So what is it that we want to test is the question. So basically, because this is my project and I know what I'm doing, I'm going to test two properties here. So xc assert equal, I'm going to test, let's see, course.name. So that's this property over here. It should be my course name. And so if I just use an empty string over here and run this test one more time, you'll be able to see the failure. So I want to show you what the failure message looks like. So clicking on that, you see that it fails because my course name is not equal to empty string. And obviously the thing that you want to test against is CourseViewModel.name over here. So you're going to assume that this is actually equal because the view that you're trying to populate with the name inside of your cell, it is actually the CourseViewModel name. So these two properties should be equal. And that's kind of how you first construct your initial test. Now, the way to break this test is, let's say someone like an intern or some kind of junior developer, right? Let's say they go into the view model over here and they modify this thing to, I don't know, contain something else like space, like that. And now that this name over here, or the course view model, the name is course name plus this empty space, right? So if someone introduces that bug into your project, what you can do is you can verify that this test should still pass But because we had that change, what will happen is this test actually fails. So this guy right here says that my course name is not equal to my course name with this little empty space over there. Okay, so that's the point of having unit tests. You want to make sure that all of your code is working as you expect it to. So why don't we go back here and remove that bit of code, hit Command U. That's going to run all of our test cases for us, and you'll see that this guy turns into a green check with the correction inside of our code. All right, so obviously the next thing we want to test is number of lessons. So we can say xct assert course.number of lessons, which is 10 because we've decided to create it with 10. Next thing we want to do is, let's see, CourseViewModel. And you kind of want to test the number of lessons somehow on the CourseViewModel, right? But that actually isn't a property of CourseViewModel. And so what I mean is the actual project that you have here, the view doesn't really actually access the number of lessons in any meaningful way, or it doesn't keep track of it rather. It actually turns it into the detail string and also the accessory type. So we're going to test those two properties instead. So what I mean is we're going to have to test the attribute type and also the, let's see, CourseViewModel, the detail text string. Okay, so how exactly do we test this stuff, right? So I guess this is the detail text string. Let me test the attribute type. Attribute, type that out correctly, or accessory type instead. Okay, so the first thing that you want to do is to actually construct the string that's actually inside of your CourseViewModel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this string over here because the number of lessons is 10 in this case, so it's just 10. I'm going to test out this. So let me just paste that in there. So course number of lessons and CourseViewModel details string, right? So let me comment that out. And so if I try to run this, it should work correctly because that's the actual string I'm expecting. So let's just run that and you'll see that this still passes. Now the way to make it fail is, well, we can change the number of lessons to something large like 50. And if you try to run this now, it's going to fail. So let me show you what that failure message says. And it is over here, so click on that. You'll see that lesson 50 is not equal to lesson 30 plus check it out. So whenever you change the number of lessons to something greater than 35, it's actually going to modify the CourseViewModel detail text string property to actually change into this style of the string. So that's kind of why our test case is failing. Now we are going to modify this back to 10. And we'll just keep it as that. Make sure to run your test again to verify that your test case actually passes. So running that one more time, this turns back into a green check mark. The next last thing that I would like to test here is assert equal, and let's just see. We are going to test the CourseViewModel.accessory type. Now because I know that the number of lessons is 10, I want to test that this guy is equal to UI Tableview accessory type, and I believe it has to be none like so. And let's see, running that one final time, you'll actually get your test to pass. So let's see, running, and this still passes. If you modify this guy to be something like the detail disclosure button, run that again, you'll notice that the test fails. So it's always good to verify that the test will actually fail. So that's kind of why I do this. And so make this back to none. If you have the accessory type defined on the second property over here, you can actually get rid of this, and that'll make it a little bit easier to read later on when you're looking at your tests. So if you click on this guy again, it'll change back to the green check mark. Okay, so I can probably remove this last comment over here. And so that's my first test case. And the second test case you should probably check for is the scenario where the number of lessons is greater than 35. So let me create another test case of test CourseViewModel, and let's call lessons over threshold is what I'll call this test function. So this guy is relatively similar to this test case above. So let me just copy some of the work here that sets up the actual test case scenario. And the only difference is I'm going to modify this to something like 100. Now, whenever the course has a number of lessons greater than 35, such as 100, some of these assertions will actually need to be changed a little bit, right? So what I mean is you want to check the XC assert equal. And what we will do is we're going to check the detail string first. So this guy, I'm going to check the detail text string. And the string that we actually use here is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to pull it from the view model object itself. So copy that, go back to the test case, and for here, let's just paste that in there. Run your test. So sometimes that button doesn't appear until you actually run your test. So let's click on that run button and it'll run this test right now. It should pass, and there we go. We get the green check mark. I believe you have a test button over here as well, so you can hit these little run buttons to run each single test if you want to. Okay, so that looks good. If you modify this to contain that space and run it again, it'll fail. And the reason is because the string will no longer match. So again, you can check the failure message by clicking this right X box over there. So you can see this has that extra space and this guy doesn't. All right, so that is the test case that we actually have to write. Now, the last assertion we have to write is to check the accessory type, right? So let's see, XTC assertion equal and CourseViewModel accessory type. Now, the view model that we've constructed over here is using this detail disclosure button for whenever the number of lessons is greater than 35. So let's just use that guy. Click back into our assertion, and over here you can just use dot and detail disclosure button. So again, if you use none, that's not going to work. So let me just hit the run button. What you'll see is that this guy goes away, but you'll get a failure at the bottom assertion. So click on that and you'll get that the accessory type doesn't match. This message right here isn't all that helpful, but you just got to change this guy to the detail disclosure button. Run this guy one more time and you'll get your final test case to pass. So hopefully that'll work out. And there we go. We have our green check mark over there. Okay, so that's kind of how we set up our unit tests inside of our project. Alrighty guys, today's video definitely went on for a lot longer than I had originally intended. But anyhow, hopefully you guys enjoyed today's very quick intro as to how we can use the MVVM architecture pattern to make our applications a lot easier to test. If you want to download the source code for today's video, you can find the link down in the description below. If you enjoyed today's video and if you like what I do on this channel, make sure to support me by checking out a couple of the courses down below on how to build out applications using the Swift programming language. That's going to be it for me today. Hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye guys.